Hey guys, so now we're finally getting into animal sketching, and we're going to start out with fish. Fish are reminiscent of the organic forms that we looked at in the earlier chapters, and their construction can be both simplistic and complex. With each type of animal that we study, we're going to follow the same process through these steps: a side view, basic forms, callouts and research, and movement. And before we dive into these steps, let's take a quick look at fish anatomy. The fish itself can be divided up into 4 parts: the head, body, tail, and the fins. The fin on top is called the dorsal fin. The tail is called the caudal fin. The ventral fins on the bottom can be divided up into the anal and pelvic fins, and there's a set of pectoral fins that are on the side. They have an opercle and preopercle covering the gills, and a lateral line that runs down the side of the body. This helps the fish with directions and keeping balance. Depending on the type of fish, they can have multiple dorsal and ventral fins. For example, there can be one dorsal fin and a second adipose fin on top that is made of a softer material, but actually not made of fat like it sounds. And for example, we have a tuna fish that has these little finlets on the bottom, which are smaller dorsal fins, and a keel on the side, on either side of the body, that helps it move quickly through water. So the first step when approaching any kind of animal is to study the proportions on the side view. Most animals have bilateral symmetry, so you can actually get all the information from that one side, then essentially project it into a 3/4 build. So we're going to divide this side view into 3 parts: the head, body, and tail. We can also now place the fins and eyes. At this stage, you want to solely focus on placement and proportion instead of trying to render or add a lot of detail. By stretching or shrinking these proportions, we can create different species of fish. And I'm going to go through a bunch of different fish now so we can see all of those different characteristics. Now, I'll do a more in-depth study on a specific fish, the arapaima. These are some of the largest freshwater fish in the world, and they can reach up to 15 feet and around 450 pounds, I believe. They have very small, flat heads with eyes near the top and a pretty gigantic body. The dorsal and ventral fins are elongated and run all the way down to a rounded tail. And even though we're using very simple shapes, you actually want to repeat this step over and over again and take your time to really familiarize yourself with those proportions. And for this arapaima, because I am already familiar with the proportions, I will get a little bit more detailed into the side view. The next step is to break down your subjects into basic forms and cast it into perspective. Try to maintain the proportions you established in the side view. For fish, you really want to push the angularity of the forms so we don't lose features. They tend to have very rounded bodies, so we want to exaggerate their geometry. For the head, we have a variety of shapes that we could use for different types of fish, and we're just going to use some simple modified forms. Find a shape that aligns closely to the proportions of the fish that you found in the side view. This next step is going to be a head study and callouts. So with this step, well, this is optional, but I feel like it really helps me understand the animal that I'm drawing, especially with animals that I'm drawing for the first time. By zooming into specific features and taking the time to break them down individually, it helps me to simplify them in a context of a full body sketch. Like if the proportions of the body are all correct, but the head is completely off, then it's still not really going to look like your animal. So a couple of notes when drawing fish. When it comes to the eyes and the mouth, you want to put some ridges and folds around those features, and that's going to help it set into the body instead of looking like it's just a completely different form sitting apart from it. Fish also tend to have fairly smooth features, So you can make your fish turn out a little too stylized if we're using completely curved lines all the way through. Also, notice the plane changes and try to really exaggerate any kind of angularity in the mouth. This is a really common place to lose the form, so pay attention to where the top transitions into the front and the side. For the fins, instead of placing all these little lines like all the way through the entire fin, just clarify the shape from the outside first, like carve from there, and then place a couple of lines to imply texture that runs all the way through. And finally, let's talk about movement. I'm going to start with the mass of the head, and then use a direction line to pull out the rest of the body, and I'm going to block out the basic shape. Then I'm going to add the eyes and the fins, and now that we've established some basic forms for the animal, I'm going to take my brush pen and clarify the form. Observe any kind of plane changes in your reference photo, especially around the edges, and really try to push those little changes. For the eyes and the mouth, remember to add some ridges and structure, and I'm going to carve out some texture and shadow shapes, focusing on the volume and contours of the form. The head will be the focal point, so I'll be pushing finer details and textures around that area, and as we fade out, or we move further away from it, we're going to lose a lot of that texture to leave negative space. The Arapaima has some gorgeous details around the gill cover, almost like beaded armor, so I'm really going to try to capture those beautiful details. And just a fun fact, these fish actually go up to the surface of the water to grab air instead of just passing water through gills like normal fish. And finally, I'm going to add some highlights on the focal point, and we are finished. Don't rush to this final stage of trying to capture movement, and practice side views and basic form breakdowns thoroughly to get familiar with those proportions first. Repetition and mileage is key. So I want you guys to pick a fish and go through these steps: a side study, a 3/4 shot using basic forms, callouts, and a sketch of the fish in motion. Let me know if you have any questions, and next up we'll take a look at some other marine animals. Bye guys!